She was the kind of woman people noticed only after she had passed by, not because she was invisible, but because she took up so little space in the world. Her steps were soft, her voice stayed low, her eyes often looked like they were listening instead of seeing. If someone asked how she was doing, she always answered the same way, with a small smile and a calm tone that suggested nothing was wrong. And most people believed her. Her days followed a simple pattern: wake up early, make coffee, sit by the window for a moment before the day began. She liked that quiet time most. It was the only time when the world did not expect anything from her. No smiles, no answers, no strength, just breathing and the sound of the morning outside. To others, her life looked steady. She worked. She paid her bills. She showed up when needed. She did not complain. That alone made people think she was doing well. In many ways, she was the example others pointed to when they talked about being strong. But strength, as she understood it, was not about standing tall. It was about learning how to bend without breaking, again and again, until bending felt normal. There were things she never spoke about, moments she had folded away so carefully that even she avoided touching them. She had learned early that sharing pain often made people uncomfortable. They either tried to fix it too quickly or turned away because they did not know what to say. Over time, she decided silence was easier. Silence asked nothing from anyone. She lived alone, but not in a lonely way that people often imagine. Her home was clean and quiet. Nothing out of place. Nothing extra. The walls held very little decoration, but everything there had meaning. A chair by the window, a shelf with a few old books, and in the corner of the room, covered with a thin cloth, stood the piano. Most people did not know it was there. The piano had been with her longer than most things in her life. It had moved with her from place to place, even when it would have been easier to leave it behind. It was not new. The wood showed its age, and some keys did not sound as clear as they once had. But she kept it clean. She dusted it often, even though she rarely played it. When she was younger, the piano had been her voice. Before she knew how to explain herself, before she knew how to hide, she had played. The music was never perfect, but it was honest. She could sit for hours, letting her fingers find sounds that matched how she felt. Back then, the world seemed wider, and her future felt open. Life, however, has a quiet way of narrowing things. Responsibilities came first, then expectations, then the slow understanding that dreams do not disappear all at once. They fade, little by little, until one day you realize you cannot remember the last time you reached for them. She did not stop playing because she wanted to. She stopped because life asked her to be practical, to be useful, to be needed in ways that left little room for music. And so the piano became something she walked past every day. She noticed it, but she did not touch it. Touching it meant remembering. Remembering meant feeling. Feeling meant opening a door she had spent years keeping closed. People who knew her would describe her as calm, patient, reliable. They would say she was easy to be around. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, her words were careful and kind. She rarely shared opinions unless asked. She never raised her voice. If she disagreed, she did so gently, as if apologizing for having a thought of her own. What they did not see was the effort behind that calm, the constant work of holding things together inside, the quiet exhaustion that came from carrying feelings alone for too long. There were nights when sleep came slowly, not because of noise, but because her mind replayed moments she wished had gone differently, words she had not said, choices she had made because she felt she had no other option. She did not think of herself as unhappy. That word felt too large, too dramatic. Instead, she thought of herself as tired in a way rest could not fix. Sometimes, on evenings when the air felt heavy, she would sit near the piano without playing it. She would rest her hand on the smooth surface and close her eyes. The touch alone brought back memories. A younger version of herself, sitting straight, focused, hopeful. She wondered what that version would think of her now. Would she be disappointed? Or would she understand? The woman did not cry often. Tears felt like another thing she could not afford. But there were moments when her chest felt tight, when breathing took effort, and she had to sit very still until the feeling passed. In those moments, she reminded herself that she had survived worse, that she always found a way to keep going. Keeping going had become her greatest skill. She had learned how to smile at the right times, how to nod while others spoke, how to offer comfort even when she needed it herself. People trusted her with their stories, their fears, their sadness. She listened with care, absorbing more than she ever released. When they thanked her, She felt useful, needed. That feeling mattered. Yet, at the end of the day, when the door closed behind her and the world grew quiet again, there was no one to ask how she was really doing, and she did not ask herself either. Asking might lead to answers she was not ready to face. The piano waited. It waited without judgment, without pressure. It did not demand that she be strong or composed. It simply existed, holding years of untouched sound inside it. Sometimes she wondered if the piano remembered her, or if it had grown used to the silence just as she had. On one particular day, nothing unusual happened. There was no big event, no sudden change. It was an ordinary day, like many before it. She returned home as she always did, placed her bag down, and stood for a moment in the center of the room. The quiet felt deeper than usual, heavier. She noticed the piano then, more clearly than before. The cloth covering it looked slightly uneven, as if it had shifted on its own. She walked over and adjusted it, her movements slow. Her fingers lingered on the edge longer than necessary. She did not lift the cover. Instead, she sat down on the nearby chair and rested her hands in her lap. Her breathing was steady, but something inside her felt restless, as if a part of her was waking up after a long sleep. She told herself it was nothing, just a passing thought, but the feeling stayed. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to think about what she had lost, not with anger or regret, but with honesty. She saw her life clearly, without pretending it was better or worse than it was. It was simply hers, full of effort, full of silence, full of things left unsaid. She did not know it yet, but something was shifting, not loudly, not suddenly, just enough to be noticed. The room remained quiet, the piano remained covered, and the woman remained seated, caught between who she had been and who she had become, unaware that the silence she carried would not stay hidden much longer. The days that followed did not look any different from before. She woke up, went through her routine, and returned home each evening with the same calm face she showed the world. If someone watched closely, they might have noticed small changes, but no one was watching that closely. Most people rarely are. What changed was not what she did, but what she felt. There was a quiet pull inside her now, a gentle but steady tug she could not fully explain. It followed her through her day, sitting in the background of every task. While she worked, while she listened to others speak, while she nodded and smiled at the right moments, the thought stayed with her. The piano. She tried to ignore it. She told herself it was nothing, just a memory stirred by tiredness or mood. She had learned long ago how to push feelings aside and keep moving. That skill had served her well for years. But this time, the feeling did not fade. It waited. At night, when the world outside grew quiet, she found herself sitting longer in the room where the piano stood. She did not always sit near it. Sometimes she stayed across the room, pretending not to notice it at all. Other times, she faced it directly, her eyes resting on the covered shape as if it were another person sharing the space. She remembered the first time she had learned to play. Her hands had been smaller then, her fingers unsure. The sound had been uneven, sometimes wrong, but she had not cared. She played because it made sense to her, because it felt like speaking without needing permission. Those memories came slowly, like images surfacing through water. She remembered the way the keys felt under her fingers, cool at first, then warm. She remembered how time seemed to move differently when she played. Minutes passed without her noticing. The rest of the world faded. Now, sitting in her quiet home, she wondered where that version of herself had gone. She did not blame anyone for the life she had. There was no single moment she could point to and say, "That is where it all changed." It had been a series of small choices, reasonable choices, necessary ones. Each one made sense at the time. Together, they led her here. There were people she had cared for deeply, people she had supported, stood beside, and sacrificed for. She did not regret loving them. What she regretted, quietly, was how often she had placed herself last without realizing that doing so came at a cost. She had learned to be needed. It gave her purpose. It gave her worth in the eyes of others. But being needed did not mean being seen. That truth took a long time to settle. One evening, she invited someone over, not for a reason she could clearly explain, just a small gathering, simple conversation. She cleaned the house more than usual, not because it was dirty, but because cleaning helped her think. It gave her something to control. The piano remained covered. When the guest arrived, they talked about ordinary things, work, news, small frustrations, small joys. The kind of talk that fills time, without asking too much from anyone. She listened carefully, as she always did. She offered thoughtful responses. She laughed when it felt appropriate. At one point, the guest's eyes drifted to the corner of the room. "What's that?" they asked, pointing. She felt her chest tighten slightly. It surprised her how quickly the feeling came. "It's a piano," she said, her voice steady. "You play?" The question was simple. There was no pressure in it. Still, she hesitated. "I used to," she said after a moment. The guest smiled. "You should play again sometime." She nodded, though she did not answer. The suggestion lingered in the air longer than the words themselves. The guest did not push. The moment passed. But inside her, something stirred. After the guest left, she stood alone in the quiet again. The house felt larger, emptier. She walked to the piano and placed her hand on the cloth covering it. This time, she did not pull away. She thought about all the times she had said maybe later to herself. All the times later never came. She wondered how many years had slipped by unnoticed, marked only by routine and responsibility. Her hand trembled slightly as she lifted the cloth and folded it neatly. The piano stood uncovered, just as it always had beneath, familiar, waiting. She did not sit down right away. Instead, she stood there, looking at it, letting the moment stretch. Her reflection stared back at her from the polished surface. She looked older than she felt, but also younger than she feared. Lines from worry, yes, but also softness from kindness. She sat down slowly. Her hands hovered above the keys without touching them. She was afraid of what would happen if she played, afraid of what she might feel, afraid of what might come out. She pressed one key. The sound was soft, slightly off, but real. It filled the room and then faded. Her breath caught. She pressed another, then another. Not a song, just sound, testing, remembering. Her fingers felt stiff at first. They did not move the way they once had. She made mistakes. She paused often, but she kept going. As she played, memories rose without warning. Moments of joy, moments of loss, long afternoons and quiet nights. Things she had buried deep inside found their way to the surface, carried by the sound. She did not cry, not yet, but her eyes burned. She played until her hands felt tired. When she stopped, the silence felt different than before. Not heavy, not empty, just quiet. She covered the piano again before going to bed, not because she wanted to hide it, but because she needed time. Time to understand what had just happened. That night, she slept more deeply than she had in a long while. In the days that followed, she played again. Not every day, not for long. Sometimes just a few notes, sometimes longer. She did not tell anyone. This was something she kept for herself. But the change showed in small ways. She stood a little straighter. Her smile came easier. She spoke a little more when she had something to say. People noticed, but they did not know why. The piano had begun to give her something she had been missing. Not answers, not solutions, but space. A place where she could be honest without explaining herself. She still carried her quiet suffering. It did not disappear, but now, it had a place to go. And though she did not realize it yet, the sound she was creating would soon be heard by more than just the walls around her. The music became part of her evenings in a quiet, careful way. She did not rush into it. She treated it like something fragile, something that could break if handled too roughly. Some nights she played only a few notes before stopping. Other nights she let her hands move longer, slowly finding their way back to patterns they once knew. She did not aim for perfection. In fact, she avoided it. Perfection had always belonged to expectations, and expectations had taken enough from her already. What she wanted now was honesty. If a note came out wrong, she let it. If her fingers hesitated, she waited. The piano responded in its own way. Some keys sounded tired, others bright. Together, they formed something imperfect but real. The sound filled the room without asking permission, touching corners that silence never reached. As the days passed, she noticed changes within herself that she could not fully explain. Her thoughts felt less crowded. The tight feeling in her chest appeared less often. When it did appear, she knew where to take it. She still kept most of her feelings to herself. That habit was deeply rooted. But now, when people spoke to her, she felt more present, more grounded. She was listening, yes, but she was also there. One afternoon, she received a message inviting her to a small gathering. Nothing formal, just a few people coming together after a long time apart. Normally, she would have found a reason not to go. She often did. Crowds made her feel like she had to perform a version of herself she no longer believed in. This time, she hesitated. She stood in her living room, looking at the piano. The cover was folded neatly on top, easy to remove. She thought about how much she had avoided moments like this in the past, how often she had chosen quiet isolation over uncertain connection. She replied yes. The gathering took place in a modest space, warm and familiar. People greeted each other with smiles that carried both comfort and distance. Conversations overlapped. Laughter rose and fell. She found a seat near the edge of the room. As she usually did. At first, she listened. She always listened. Stories passed around about daily struggles, small victories, shared memories. She nodded. She smiled. She felt the familiar urge to stay small. Then someone mentioned music, not in a dramatic way, just a casual comment about how much they missed hearing live sound instead of recordings. Another person agreed, saying music felt different when it was played right in front of you. She felt the pull again, stronger this time. Someone asked if anyone there played an instrument. A few hands went up. Then the question moved on. But something inside her shifted. Her heart beat faster. Her palms grew warm. She surprised herself by speaking. "I have a piano," she said. The words landed softly, but they landed. A few people looked at her with interest. "You play?" someone asked. She took a breath. "A little," she replied. It was not a lie. It was also not the full truth. There was a pause, not uncomfortable, just open. Then someone smiled and said, "You should play sometime." She nodded, but this time, the idea did not feel distant. It felt close, possible. When she returned home that evening, her mind was restless. She uncovered the piano and sat down without hesitation. Her fingers found the keys more easily now. The sound felt fuller, stronger. She played not to practice, but to remember. Each note carried weight. Each pause spoke as loudly as the sound itself. As she played, she imagined someone else listening, not judging, not analyzing, just hearing. The thought made her nervous, but it also made her feel alive. A few days later, the gathering continued at her place, almost without planning. Someone suggested stopping by. Someone else agreed. Before she had time to overthink it, people were sitting in her living room, holding cups, speaking softly. The piano stood uncovered. She felt exposed and calm at the same time. Someone asked about it. She answered simply. No explanations, no history. After a while, the room grew quieter. Conversation slowed. Someone said, "Would you play something?" The request was gentle. No pressure. Still, her heart raced. She looked at the piano, then at the people. She thought about how many times she had stayed silent to keep things easy for others. How many times she had chosen comfort over truth. She sat down. Her hands shook at first. She placed them on the keys and waited until her breathing slowed. The room held its breath with her. She began to play. The music was not loud. It did not announce itself. It unfolded slowly, like a story told in a low voice. The notes were simple, but they carried depth. They carried yours. As she played, the room changed. People leaned forward without realizing it. Cups were set down. Eyes softened. No one spoke. The music did something words could not. It moved through the space and settled into each listener differently. Some heard sadness. Some heard longing. Some heard comfort. What they all heard was truth. Her fingers moved with more confidence now. Not because she was skilled, but because she was honest. She let the music take its time. She let it pause where it needed to pause. Inside her, something opened. She felt the weight she had been carrying for years shift slightly. Not disappear, just move, just breathe. When she finished, she did not rush to stand. She let the last note fade completely before lifting her hands. The silence that followed was deep, but it was not empty. It was full of understanding. No one clapped right away, and she was grateful for that. Applause would have pulled the moment back into the world of performance. Instead, someone quietly said, "Thank you." She nodded, unable to speak later. After everyone had gone, she sat alone in the same spot. The room felt different now, lighter, warmer. She realized something then. Her suffering had never been invisible. It had just been unheard. And now, without meaning to, she had given it a voice. She did not know what would come next. She did not need to. For the first time in a long while, the present moment felt enough. She covered the piano before going to bed, but her hands lingered on the cloth. This time, not in hesitation, but in quiet gratitude. The room returned to silence, but it was no longer the same silence she had lived with for years. It was the kind that listens. After that evening, something changed in the way people looked at her, not in a dramatic or obvious way. No one treated her like a performer or spoke about the music loudly. The change was quieter than that, softer. People listened to her more closely. They paused before speaking, as if they sensed there was more behind her words than before. She noticed it to Dot when she walked into a room. Conversation slowed just a little, not because she demanded attention, but because her presence carried something new, or perhaps something old that had finally surfaced. She felt it in the way people met her eyes, in the way they waited for her to finish a thought instead of filling the silence for her. The piano stayed uncovered more often now. She did not play every time someone came over. She did not want it to become an expectation. The music meant too much to her to turn it into something she owed others. Still, there were moments when the room itself seemed to ask for it. One evening, a few people sat quietly in her living room. There was no plan, no reason for the gathering beyond shared time. The light was low. Outside, the sounds of the street drifted in through a slightly open window. Someone spoke about a hard week. Another mentioned feeling tired without knowing why. The words were simple, but heavy. As each person spoke, the room seemed to gather their feelings, holding them gently instead of letting them fall away. She listened. She always listened. But this time, instead of offering words, she stood up. No one asked where she was going. They already knew. She sat at the piano and rested her hands on the keys. She did not think about what to play. She did not plan. She let her fingers choose. The first notes were slow, almost unsure. Then they settled into a rhythm that felt like breathing, in and out, rise and fall. The room grew still. The music carried something familiar, not a specific memory, but a shared feeling, the kind that sits quietly inside people when they are too tired to explain themselves, the kind that comes from holding things in for too long. As she played, she felt connected to everyone in the room without looking at them. She did not need to. The sound reached them all the same. Someone closed their eyes. Someone leaned back, letting the chair support them fully for the first time that evening. Someone pressed their lips together, holding back words they did not need to say. The music did not try to comfort. It did not promise things would be better. It simply stayed present, honest and steady. Inside her, old feelings stirred again, but they did not overwhelm her this time. They moved through her, guided by the sound. She felt sadness, yes, but she also felt strength, not the forced kind she had relied on for years, but a quieter strength that came from allowing herself to feel. When she finished, the silence felt sacred. No one rushed to speak. Eventually, someone whispered, that felt like being understood. She did not respond. She did not need to. The music had already spoken. Words spread, slowly, not in the way stories usually do, filled with excitement or exaggeration. People simply mentioned it in passing, that she played, that it felt different, that listening made them feel something they could not explain. She did not advertise. She did not invite attention. Still, more people found themselves sitting quietly in her living room, drawn by something they could not name. She noticed how different each moment felt. Some evenings were heavy, filled with grief that hung in the air. Other times were lighter, touched by hope. She did not change her playing to match the mood. She trusted the music to find its own way. There were nights when she stopped mid-piece, overwhelmed by emotion. When that happened, no one reacted with discomfort. They waited. They understood. That understanding was new to her. For most of her life, she had felt the need to keep going, to push past her own limits so others would not feel uneasy. Now, she was learning that stopping could be just as honest as continuing. One evening, after everyone had left, she sat alone again. The quiet returned, but it no longer felt like isolation. It felt like rest. She thought about how much she had carried without realizing it. How many times she had told herself she was fine when she was anything but. She did not feel angry about it, just aware. The piano had not changed her life in a sudden way. There were no big decisions made, no dramatic turns. What it gave her was permission. Permission to exist as she was, without apology. She began to notice similar quiet suffering in others, in the way someone sighed before speaking, in the way another avoided eye contact when asked a simple question. She recognized it because she had lived it. When people spoke to her now, they often shared more than they meant to, not because she asked, but because she made space. She realized then that the music did more than fill a room. It opened it. One night, a person stayed behind after everyone else had gone. They did not speak right away. They stood near the piano, their hands folded. "I didn't know I needed that," they said finally. She nodded. "Neither did I," she replied. The words surprised her, but they felt right. She began to understand that her suffering, though quiet, had shaped her in ways she could now use to help others feel less alone. Not by fixing them, not by offering advice, but by being present. The piano remained a part of her evenings, but it no longer felt like something she was reclaiming from the past. It felt like something growing with her. The room had become a place where people could arrive tired and leave lighter, where silence was not awkward, where music did not perform, but listened. And each time she touched the keys, the sound carried not just her own story, but the unspoken stories of everyone who sat and listened. Her quiet suffering, once hidden, now filled the room in a way that did not overwhelm. It connected. And though she still did not know where this path would lead, she knew one thing with certainty. She was no longer alone in her silence. Time did not stop after those evenings filled with music. Life continued, as it always does, with its routines and small demands. She still woke up early, still made coffee, still sat by the window when the day was quiet enough to allow it. But something inside her had shifted, and that change stayed with her. The piano was no longer just an object in the room. It had become a presence, not one that demanded attention, but one that offered it. On some days, she played. On other days, she didn't. Both felt right. What mattered was that she no longer avoided it. People still came by from time to time, sometimes alone, sometimes in small groups. There was no schedule, no announcement. It happened naturally, the way meaningful things often do. Someone would sit down, take a breath, and feel safe enough to stay quiet. She learned that silence could be shared. One evening, she did not play at all. The room was filled with soft conversation and long pauses. No one asked her to touch the keys. No one expected anything, and she realized that this, too, was part of the change. She was no longer valued only for what she gave, but for who she was. That realization settled gently into her. There were moments when old habits returned, times when she felt the urge to disappear again, to make herself smaller for the comfort of others. When that happened, she noticed it without judgment. She reminded herself that growth did not mean never struggling again. It meant knowing where to return when the struggle appeared. Often, she returned to the piano. She began to play differently now, not reaching for sadness as she once had, but allowing it to pass through when it arrived. The music grew softer, then steadier. It held space for grief, but also for calm, for acceptance. She realized that suffering does not always ask to be fixed. Sometimes it only asks to be acknowledged. One afternoon, sunlight filled the room in a way that made everything feel lighter. Dust floated in the air. The piano keys reflected the light. She sat down and played without thinking. The sound felt peaceful, almost complete. As she played, she felt a quiet gratitude, not for the pain she had endured, but for the way it had shaped her ability to understand others, for the way it had taught her to listen deeply, to stay present. She thought about the version of herself she once wondered about, the younger one, the one who believed music could carry feelings words could not. She smiled, realizing that belief had never truly left her. It had only waited. Later that evening, someone sat across from her and said, "You seem different lately." She considered the words. Different. The word did not scare her. "I feel more like myself," she replied. The person nodded, as if that answer made perfect sense. There was no big ending to her story, no final performance, no applause. The piano did not become a stage. The room did not turn into a place of spectacle. And that was exactly what made it meaningful. Her life did not become louder. It became clearer. She still carried her history. She always would. But it no longer weighed her down the same way. It had become part of her, not a burden she had to hide. One night, after everyone had gone, she sat alone again. The piano stood uncovered. The room was still. She rested her hands on the keys but did not play. She listened to the quiet, to her breathing, to the steady rhythm of her own presence in the world. She realized then that healing did not arrive all at once. It arrived in moments like this, simple, honest, unnoticed by most. She covered the piano and turned off the lights. As she prepared for bed, she felt tired in a different way than before. Not drained, just full. The next morning, she sat by the window as usual. The world outside moved on, unaware of the small transformation that had taken place inside her home. She did not need the world to notice. She knew the piano would always be there, not as a reminder of what she had lost, but as proof of what she had carried and finally allowed to be heard. Her quiet suffering had filled the room once. Now, it no longer needed to. What remained was understanding, connection, and a silence that felt kind. She took a slow breath and let the day begin.